Hello, my name is David Willingham, and today I will be presenting on my progress in my PhD thesis entitled Sex and Love Addiction in Anglophone Cinema: Etiology, Symptoms, Consequences, and the Process of Recovery. This doctoral thesis, under the direction of Dr. Martín Urdiales Shaw, will explore representations of trauma, sex and love addiction, resilience, and recovery in Anglophone cinema, examining relevant works spanning from the latter 20th century to the present, including Exotica, Under the Skin, LA Without a Map, Autofocus, I Am a Sex Addict, Shame, Thanks for Sharing, Untogether, Wobble Palace, Mope, and Private Chat. Within the context of a theoretical discussion of trauma, addiction, resilience, and recovery, these films will serve as prisms shedding light on the traumatic or socially induced triggers of addiction, demonstrating how sex and love addiction in particular serve as dysfunctional coping mechanisms, problematic strategies for avoiding social engagement or intolerable cognitions. Particular attention will be paid to the ways in which cultural contexts and belief systems affect the understanding, acquisition, and expression of these addictions, as well as the attainment of reprieve and sustained flourishing. This analysis will draw from theoretical resources in the fields of medical and health humanities, trauma studies, addiction medicine, sexuality studies, cultural studies, psychoanalysis, personality psychology, positive psychology, mimetic theory, terror management theory, polyvagal theory, moral philosophy, the theology of the body, and additional insights gleaned from 12-step recovery programs. My research goals are the following: to render the experience of trauma and its role in the origins of sex and love addictions more intelligible through an analysis of various works of Anglophone cinema spanning from 1994 until more or less the present. To identify and elucidate the social forces that induce and enable sex and love addiction. To clarify the relationship between sex and love addictions and nihilism. To draw practicable conclusions regarding the flourishing, renewed sense of significance and social connection that both prevent sex and love addictions and accompany the process of recovery from said conditions. And finally, in my concluding chapter, I would like to elaborate my vision of a culture that encourages reverence for the human body and sustainable intimacy rather than the isolation of solitary sexual compulsion and maladaptive fantasy, or the depersonalized sexual and emotional consumption of people as drugs. With regards to methodology, my initial chapter will cover definitions of addiction, including process addiction, and specifically sex addiction and love addiction. There will also be theoretical examinations of the etiology of sex and love addiction based on trauma, genetics, psychiatric disorders, what I would call social inducements, and existential triggers. From there, I will elaborate the symptoms of sex and love addiction, including the discussion of various definitions of acting out. That varies from theoretician to theoretician or from program to program with reference to people who are recovering from said conditions. Next, I'll look at the consequences of sex and love addiction, both acute and chronic, and finally, the process of recovery. Then in subsequent chapters, I will do in-depth examination of various films as case studies for sex and love addiction and opportunities for further reflection on trauma, social inducement, and the process of recovery. And then in my concluding chapter, there will be an elaboration on the research goals with discussion of practicable conclusions regarding sex and love addiction prevention and or recovery, along with the an elaboration of the aforementioned vision of a culture that promotes flourishing, community, and sustainable intimacy, and more details to be discovered during the research and writing process. With regards to methodology, first and foremost, there will be attentive viewing of the films to be discussed, And of course, extensive reading in the pertinent fields, beginning with medical humanities, health humanities, trauma studies, addiction medicine, and polyvagal theory. Also sexuality studies, psychoanalysis, personality psychology, positive psychology, film theory and cultural studies, mimetic theory, terror management theory, moral philosophies, and more or less in the concluding chapter, religious studies, such as the theology of the body and other religious traditions related to bodily integrity and sexuality, such as brahmacharya and kareza. In addition, my research process includes attending and participating in conferences related to trauma, addiction, and film studies, both in person and online. Immersion in the culture of 12-step programs related to sex and love addiction, including attendance of open fellowship meetings, meaning meetings that are open to people who don't necessarily personally identify with said addiction, both in person and virtual. Interviews with fellowship members, always with a commitment to maintaining the anonymity of all sources regarding these fellowships. Also, an ongoing engagement with 12-step literature and audiovisual material, both broad-based, just based on 12-step principles and fellowship in general, and also specifically 12-step literature and audiovisual materials related to sex and love addiction. With regards to the writing process, first there's research and note-taking based on my sources and ideas that occur to me from there. Outlining, I do have basic structure outlined now. A thesis journal, a lot of free writing, exploring particular ideas that occurred to me I'd like to develop more, or writing to think. Zero draft, I'm getting to that. Should be beginning towards the end of May or early June. My filmography has grown quite a bit since I began this project, as well as my general bibliography.